Hello, folks. Welcome back to Management 5804 Leadership in Technology Based Organizations. I'm Dr. David Townsend, and this will be Lecture 2.2. And in this lecture, we want to spend a few minutes talking about the interchange between strategic agility and building the AI powered organization. And so, as we've talked about in the last unit, one of the critical challenges that technology strategists face today is dealing with the inherent complexity of the environment. Right? And there's just so many factors at play, so many technological changes, so many critical issues to address. It's very difficult for firms to make compelling strategic decisions, to be able to position themselves to take advantage of new opportunities, or to defend against some of the disruptive potential of some of these new technologies. And so in this lecture, we want to spend a few minutes thinking about the implications of emerging artificial intelligence platforms and how they need to be infused within the organization. So as the reading talks about, there's this notion of building an AI-powered organization and some of the changes that artificial intelligence is going to entail within organizations. And so we want to link that idea with this notion of strategic agility that we've been discussing in these lectures. And so as we talked about, right, the Dine model of complexity really deals with some of the kind of four key aspects of complexity within organizations' environments. And so we talked about the diagnostic challenges that firms face in trying to really get a handle of what's happening in the external environment. We talked about the interactive challenges as those factors and all the different relevant issues that strategists have to take into account when they're formulating strategic decisions. As those things start to interact together, right, they produce these nonlinear changes, right, these non-predictable changes in the environment. And so that end level, right, makes it really difficult oftentimes for organizations to really get a handle and make effective decisions for the future, because there's just so many things that are happening that you can't really account for it, and especially as those factors are interacting together. And then EA deals with that exponential change, right? And so that rapid, massive change that happens as we move from seemingly non-existent pressures to overwhelming pressures facing an organization in a very short time period. And as we talked about, a lot of these technologies are producing this transitional moment for society, right? And there's been a lot of speculation about the end of Moore's law. Again, Moore's law is something that's been around since the 1960s, and this notion of, every 18 months to 24 months, depending on who formulated it, and during the era in which they formulated it basically measured the number of transistors that you could squeeze onto one of these chips that firms like Intel would produce, right? And so Gordon Moore laid out, this law and basically said, over time you're going to be able to do it, and that's going to lead to this exponential improvement in computing power. But now as we kind of reach the physical limits, right? So now we're at this nanoscale with these chips, and there's just not really that much more in the way that you can shrink the chip size down. And in fact, some people basically say we've already hit kind of the physical limits of what you can build on a chip. But there's a lot of people speculating, well, maybe that's going to lead to this decline or this big crunch within computational circles, because we've been relying on this exponential increase in improvement in computing power and declining costs for long periods of time. But again, as we talked about in the last lecture, there's kind of this shift as we move from silicon-based chips to potentially this quantum age, right? And quantum computing is intimately tied up with artificial intelligence and is kind of the speculative view of how we'd be able to essentially come up with a new computational paradigm. And the difficult part about really understanding the implications of these technological trends for organizations is that, again, there's a lot of new ways of thinking and making strategic decisions that firms are going to face. And so what we've talked about is there's this major shift from this organize and execute, right? So this kind of industrial model of strategic decision making within technology strategy to experiment and emerge, right? So we don't really know what's going to happen. The Dine model illustrates the various dimensions that make it difficult for us to make very effective and successful strategic decisions when formulating technology strategy. And so we've got to give way to trying to experiment, right? To take into account the inherent complexities and uncertainties of the environments in which we operate. And so we talked a little bit in the last lecture just about the agile difference. And those of you who've worked in software development know that agile has become a critical point of conversation in many circles, right? And the central intuition is, instead of really having stable demand side functions, right? So instead of having stable preferences of what our customers really want from a piece of software or an IT product, where the firm can just organize itself for efficiently build it and deliver it to the organization. And I love the Big Bang approach here, right? It just says do stuff and then deliver, right? It's simple. It can't get any more simple than that in terms of how to produce software. But the challenge is, again, in complex environments and needs and wants are changing. Agile has been, rapidly emerging as a way to try to contend with, these complex issues, because, now as customer preferences are changing, as technology continues to improve, as new paradigms emerge, quantum computing systems, down the road, maybe 10, 15 years down the road, we see some of these systems start to be deployed in commercial settings, right? It's going to require lots of changes. And so the ability to iterate, to link in with customers and stakeholders, come up with a product, see how they interact with it, get new specifications from customers, and continuously improve and update software is certainly something that Agile is very well suited for, and especially now that we have lots of cloud computing platforms where it's not as difficult, to update software, because again, if everybody's running off of cloud servers, it's a little bit easier. I mean, some of you who work in this, well, it's not always easy, and so I'm certainly not saying in every circumstance it's easy to update these cloud systems. But compare that versus having potentially millions of localized PCs that have various, different incompatible software, and you're trying to update that. So again, there's some value in this agile approach to dealing with the complexities in the environment. So this iterative design process is becoming more critically important, and we'll spend some time through the semester talking about the role of iterative design, right? And so this idea that we're going to engage with stakeholders and customers throughout the process. And within that, we're going to be updating these interpretive frames, right? So the framing strategies helps us make sense of the complex environment by narrowing our focus down to a couple key factors and then allowing us to figure out what do these factors really mean for us? What kind of interpretation can we draw, and how can we formulate a strategic decision to deal with it? And through this iterative design, if we're engaging in these repeat interactions with customers and stakeholders, we can really calibrate products and market needs. And we'll talk about this idea of product market fit really is the holy grail of technology strategy through the semester. And within that, again, this iterative design process allows us to start to approach some optimal configurations there. But the question is, how do we design organizations to be able to deal, effectively with this broader notion of strategic agility? And specifically within the context of what AI is, changes that AI is going to enact within society. And as we've talked about, there's lots of different views of AI. Lots of people have kind of this utopian view. Certainly economic forecasters will point to the considerable amount of value that can be created. And so the article, again, that we read talks about $13 trillion added to the global economy over the next 10 years, right? Which is a considerable amount of value that could be captured by organizations. Next year alone, there's some expectations that it'll be about $46 billion in new revenue that firms can capture. All right, again, it's so new opportunities coming online. China itself is a country is anticipating about a $1 trillion AI industry within the next 10 years. And so again, just massive investments being made to try to grow companies that have brand new products and services that they can offer to customers in order to, again, these sort of digital platforms in order to capture some of this value. Within that, though, right, AI is something it's deeply misunderstood, and again, there's lots of different ways that we'll kind of think about AI and conceptualize what do we even mean by artificial intelligence. But for organizations that are dealing with these advanced analytics, right, these really sophisticated algorithms embedded within the organization to help with decision making, right, to kind of replace or augment the cognitive work of knowledge workers, right, or some of the way that the rhetoric unfolds here, that you have, again, smart software being embedded within just an infinite number almost of processes within an organization that really transforms how we process and how we take into account information. And so as the article talks about, one of the critical challenges here that we've known is that most organizations are very siloed, right? So the industrial era was very much focused on the efficient organization. And so everybody who works within a specific job function works in the same group. So if everybody's in the corporate finance group, you might be located in the same building or at least in the same area. And there's sort of this co-location, and you only work on this corporate finance projects. And one of the critical ways that agile thinking, as it started to just really diffuse broadly across a variety of different organizations, is moving moving into the kind of center of corporate life, this notion of interdisciplinary collaboration, right? So these agile teams of maybe 8 to 10 people that work together across multiple different functions within the organization in order to formulate strategy, in order to to build products, in order to engage with customers. And so the shift is not something that surprises us, right? We all know that we've got to move away from just very functional, very isolated, very narrow thinking about our roles and jobs within organizations to this interdisciplinary collaboration. But within that, one of the more difficult changes is going to be moving from experience to data-driven decision-making, right? And so one of the great examples of this I've been discussing with people recently is, say you're a small business operating within a small grocery store operating within a rapidly growing city. Let's say you're right outside Washington D.C. and you've got this great grocery store. Your family's been running it for long periods of time, and you start to think, okay, AI could be an effective tool that we can use for some demand forecasting, right? Because we spend a lot of money on inventory, and because our inventory are groceries that many of them are perishable, and so if we guess wrong, right, they're going to go. The meat's going to spoil, or some of the other milk's going to spoil, and we're going to lose some of these products. We won't be able to sell them to our customers, and so we got a lot of money tied up in inventory cost. We're losing a lot because maybe we go through the kind of seasonality to our sales. And so you adopt one of these platforms, forecasting platforms, and all of a sudden the software comes back with a recommendation that you should increase your meat supply by 80%. Right, so it's kind of calculated the effects of some different geopolitical tensions. It's calculated some buying habits, right? It's taken into account maybe millions of data points to predict that, well, there's going to be a huge run on meat here. You want to increase your stores by 80%. But your experience basically tells you no way, right? You would never have that much meat in your store because not only would it be difficult to store it, but your customers are never going to buy that much meat. You've never seen that in the past. And so the question is, what do you do at that stage, right? Do you rely on your old experience, or do you use the insights that have been delivered to you by this AI platform in order to take what probably could be a pretty big risk in order to increase your meat inventory by 80%, right? Because it's something that really could lead to massive losses if there's something wrong. And so this is one of the real challenges here, right, is how do we move away from our intuitions and our experiences and how we've dealt with customers to use data to drive, and in these advanced analytics platforms, to drive some of our strategic decision making in an organization. And as we'll talk about, one of the real bridges that we need to do is how do we kind of meld together our experience and our intuitions with these platforms in order to come up with the best insights and the best strategic choices for the organization. And the third one, as we've talked about, as the article highlights, is this notion of embracing agile, experimental, or adaptable systems within an organization, right? So these are some barriers that organizations are facing. And so the question for us is, how do we address these as strategists in order to position our company to be effective in implementing these new AI platforms? And so the critical thing that we're going to talk about this semester is this notion of the augmentation thesis, right? And so again, a lot of people tend to take these varying views about the role of artificial intelligence in society or in organizations. And you've got kind of this utopian view that it's going to lead to this grand amount of change, and it's going to be this incredible usher in this incredible new era of global prosperity, right? I mean, $13 trillion in new value is a significant amount of money or value that could be created over the next 10 years, right? So again, that's not a small chunk of a global economy in terms of growth, right? And and again, whether or not the predictions themselves are true, right? There's a bit of this sort of utopian edge to it. And then you've got other people that argue that again, because these machines are growing exponentially more intelligent and sophisticated, that we don't necessarily need human workers anymore, especially for the cognitive work that was supposed to be the major thing that we do as humans, right? The edge that we always had over the machine. And you've seen some things recently where people talk about creativity, and that there's going to be more need for creativity and creative work among human actors, and then we'll just allow machines to take over the more rational or the more programmable, computable parts of our job. And one of the real misnomers here is that some of these AI systems, the way that they're designed, they actually have significant elements of creativity built into them. And so if we think about creativity as possibility generation, right? Thinking of all the different ways that you could design or configure a product, or all the different ways that you could approach a market. Well, machines, these software platforms that companies like Autodesk and others are producing are incredible at some of these design. Those of you who may work with architecture firms know that some of the real crazy designs in buildings, like with movable parts and all sorts of weird geometric shapes, have been really dramatically enhanced by the use of these advanced software platforms that can take into account very, very complex design configurations in order to produce a significant amount of or significantly new, unique designs for organizations. And so I love the way Deloitte has this, has a kind of future of work study, and you can click on the link there. If you click on Deloitte within the slides, you can actually go and read some of the broader report here. But I love the quote here. It says, the advent of AI makes it possible, indeed desirable, to reconceptualize work, not as a set of discrete tasks laid end to end in a predefined process, but as collaborative problem-solving efforts where humans define the problems, machine help find the solutions, and humans verify the acceptability of those solutions. And that really encapsulates this augmentation thesis that we're going to focus upon in the class. And as you see here, again, it's up to us as strategists to really define the problems or strategic opportunities that we're facing as an organization, and we can use these platforms to help us come up with all sorts of unique solutions we may not have necessarily ever thought about or conceived of the possibility, within kind of our normal mode of operation. But because we're deploying some of these tools, and again, we'll talk about these in very specific terms as we move through the semester, there's a chance for us to come up with really unique ways, really unique strategies for the organization. So within that augmentation thesis, right, we've got to set the organization up for success. And so defining what vision we have behind AI, right, implementing this augmentation thesis, understanding the implications for us with our careers and in our roles as leaders within organizations, right? So how do we work with our teams? How do we work within our organizations in order to produce some of these potential breakthroughs, that these really incredible tools can offer to us? But we have to help people overcome the fear of change, right? And AI is transformative, right? Some of these tools really are transformative in the way that we can approach certain design processes. And we'll talk more about this, but if you think about material science, right, and trying to come up with all sorts of new ways to approach the design of some kind of physical product. People could spend their careers investigating, the unique physical attributes of certain types of materials. But something that might take 40 years for people to learn and really develop a deep expertise in, you've got these systems that can understand it sometimes in a matter of minutes. So you kind of take the design process from 40 years to 40 minutes in terms of the ability to rapidly speed up thinking about how to meld materials together and how to come up with unique designs. And Autodesk has these topological optimization tools. I'll link in something you can look at within Module 2 as an optional thing. And you can see how they use it to really come up with these incredibly new designs with new materials for products. And so, again, that's just, it's terrifying for certain people because the ways that we've typically built expertise in the past are going to change. But, again, the fear of change is going to be one of those issues that we're all going to have to deal with. And none of us can completely forecast some of these changes. And so it's going to be something that requires us, again, to have kind of a deep understanding of how to build successful organizations with AI really at the core. Budgeting, as we'll talk about a bit, and then balancing feasibility, time investment, and value, again, are all different choices that we need to make and understand the strategic goals and aims of rebuilding a company around AI. So within that, organizing AI for scale is one of the points of conversation in the article. And I'll just say that the hub and spoke system, there's reasons why the authors highlight that. Again, they're talking about the hub being the IT function within the organization. I don't think this is necessarily even remotely an effective way to organize a company around AI. And the authors basically acknowledge it in the article. But there is some new platforms, kind of these digital ecosystem models that are emerging, right? And that really have built this frictionless information flow, right? So you've got this digital architecture that basically links lots of different seemingly disparate businesses together into a comprehensive digital whole. And AI tools really are powering how these different organizations work together. And we'll see this real directly in real powerful ways when we start to think about Alibaba and some of the ways that Chinese companies are organizing these digital ecosystems. And so again, towards the end of the semester, we're really going to tackle this, and we'll see, right, how these things are linking together. But that's going to require us to really understand how to manage business model complexity. Right. So as we move through some of these points of discussion over the semester, AI is really going to be at the center of how we conceive of technology innovation strategy for the future. But these are just technologies. And as I mentioned, this is not a course about the latest gizmos and gadgets and cool tech, right? This is a course about technology strategy. How do we make great decisions as leaders of organizations in order to create immense value for our customers and to position organizations for long-term success? And so, again, thinking about AI as a powerful suite of tools, and lots of different types of tools fall under that umbrella, is not going to be the major agenda here, right? That's going to be part of what we do. It's an important point of discussion, but we're using these as examples to drive and deepen our understanding of how to formulate effective